Thanks very much for joining us for this edition of the Intermodal Logistics Podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter with my co-host today, InTech Logistics President Shelly Austin. Hey, Shelly.
Hey, Kevin.
And what we're going to discuss today is, a couple of things, but we're going to start with the situation with particularly dray drivers in California based on some enforcement of a couple of different rules and regulations that's been ramped up over the past several months. And we're also going to talk about maybe check in on the market and talk about the company that our guest has founded and leads. And that guest is Brian Kempisty, the founder and CEO of PortX Logistics. Brian, thanks very much for joining us.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm here from Bozeman, Montana, bright and early.
Yeah, as Shelly was noting, a very appropriate backdrop there too. I mean, it wouldn't be bad to see like outside too. I guess
yeah, no,
it's a little more variable on that, right?
Pretty spectacular out there.
So first, tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you got into the industry, and how PortX came about.
Yeah, no, I've got a really great story. I grew up on a small dairy farm, hour south of Buffalo. It was a very small school that I went to, graduated with 53 kids. I ended up going to Canisius University in Buffalo, New York. And as a rural farm kid, of course, money was not easily found. So when I was a sophomore, I went to the intern office and I said, "Is there any paid internships?" And they're like, "Probably not, but try this guy." So this guy, his name was Dale. It was a Canadian brokerage firm, primarily cross-border, but he was in Buffalo, New York. So basically, I started just making phone calls, inside sales. After a year, I had about 12 employees working for me doing that same thing. After I graduated college, I worked at a trucking company. So asset-based, I had to work the docks on Saturdays, really understood what it meant, to operate a trucking business and not just a brokerage. And then when I was 23, Dale had called and he said, "Hey, I'm going to start my own business. Do you want to run the sales and marketing?" And I was like, I got a pretty good gig and a pretty good book of business. How about you run the Canadian division? I'll run the US division. Mm-hmm. That company was founded. It was called Cornerstone Logistics. We had an office in Oakville, Ontario, Buffalo, New York, Long Beach, California. And we took quite the risk to get started. No business teacher, professor would ever tell you to do this. We took out $100,000 in credit card cash advances and just went for it. And
wow.
We ran that business until 2006. I was turning 30, so I was still very young, but Dale was turning 60. And I had to make a decision. Do I take a big check or do I go into debt? So I took a big check. And then, a couple of years had passed, the economic crisis in 2009, and they really needed somebody to come back and try to get the business on its feet. So I was at Cornerstone again for some years, grew that business again. It was sold again to another Canadian outfit. And I had a very great team, loyal team. And they're like, "We want to do something else. We have hopes and dreams." And I had already lived in Montana. I was not in New York anymore. And I said, "If you guys want to do this, I'll do it, but it's on you." Right. So October 2nd of 2017, we formed PortX Logistics, Drayage, transloading, and trucking, based on culture, service, and tech. And this time it wasn't just a brokerage. We started with one truck, but we slowly kind of grew that business. So a combination of our assets, owner operators, and logistics network, we could handle drayage, transloading, and trucking at every port and ramp in the US and Canada. So now the combination of everything is 450 trucks, 1,200 chassis, 200 acres of yard space. We've got transload facilities in multiple cities across the United States. We have a Canadian operation, so we understand inbound drayage, inbound transloading, trucking to the border, allowing the customs broker to border clear, final delivery. So we've really got a sweet spot in that drayage, transloading, and trucking. And that could be your local Chicago drayage or those more complex moves that require some expertise. And, I've been pounding the table since the pandemic, make drayage and transloading part of your supply chain solution and not an afterthought.
Excellent.
Yeah. So you mentioned you kind of covered what you cover in terms of locations. Are you at all? Are you really a presence at all of the ports then as well? In addition to some of these major areas like Chicago, like the
in Chicago, for example, we'd have like 80 trucks. Our asset profile is really Seattle, Long Beach, Denver, Houston, Dallas, Kansas City, Memphis, Chicago, Savannah. So that's currently where we have assets. We're looking at some point. We've got a couple other rail ramp cities that we're going to roll out in 26, possibly another East Coast operation in 26. So we're continuing to push the ball forward, even though it's not been the easiest of times in drayage and domestic trucking as far as rates and volumes are concerned.
So outside of asset presence, are you still working in some of the other areas as well?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, with our brokerage or logistics network, we're handling containers out of Prince Rupert, Vancouver, Halifax, Montreal, Boston, Massachusetts. We've done big break bulk projects in Mobile, Alabama. So we have the capabilities really to handle all of the U.S. and Canada. And, some customers, they want your assets and they want to know the asset is dedicated. But, frankly, there's not one company that has assets to do everything 100% of the time. So, we've got a nice mix and combination so that we can flex up and down and really provide the service our customers need.
So one of the other kind of key aspects of PortX is the technology piece. So how important has that been to sort of differentiate PortX and kind of why you've been pushing that direction based on the time of when it was founded to now?
We started the business 4 pillars: culture, service, tech, and trucks. So we needed the best people. We needed proactive service and communication. We needed the technology to tie it together, and then the assets really to stand behind us, so people knew that we were, a serious trucking and transportation company. What the technology? I always call it the technology stack. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I would say in the the 2000s, maybe even the 2010s, there was a thought that maybe we could build this one silver bullet platform that could do everything. And we have a TMS that is obviously core to housing all of the data. But one of the things that we did during the pandemic or just pre-pandemic was we started tracking the containers from origin port to destination port, then through transload or on the rail, and then to final delivery. So that allowed our customers kind of an end-to-end visibility tool for their containerized cargo. But selfishly, what we were doing for us was, as I said earlier, drayage is generally an afterthought. We were getting a 17-day head start on anybody else because we knew when the vessel sailed, we knew where the container was. If you remember back in 2020 or 2021, you couldn't even get pallets on the West Coast. We were paying nearly $50 per pallet. So you had to pre-plan for whether that's drivers, yard space, warehouse space, pallets. So that really putting all of that technology together was the backbone of us being proactive and prepared, and then also giving the customers complete visibility. So in addition to integrating the ocean tracking, the GPS delivery, we also work with another partner. We take a picture of the container number, we take a picture of the seal, we take a picture of the cargo, and it automatically will go from this application into the document section of the TMS. No more downloading photos and emailing them. You just take a picture of these things, and then you're getting updates in real time. The driver app that we use, if we're doing a transload and it's Long Beach, we do the dray, we do the transload and truck it to Dallas, Texas, for example. We have a link that all parties of the supply chain can see. It'll show where the cargo is. It'll show how fast the driver is moving. We can message within this app, but it's way better than, the old school days of check calls. Where is this guy? Is he going to be late? We deal with a lot of production freight, right? So it's not about the dispatcher or even the receiving manager. Maybe the production manager needs this part, and they can just simply share the link for this PO number or part number. So the technology's been super important, and we see ourselves as leaders, especially in the drayage industry, because drayage has kind of lagged much of transportation as far as tech adoption.
So do you find yourself, because you're very port driven with your transload services and that, are you mostly in the international drayage space, or are you doing both on drayage?
We do both, but I would say a majority of our business is in the international space. But we do, also domestic boxes, rail ramps, and sometimes that's better because it's easier from the chassis perspective.
Absolutely.
So, there's pros and cons. It's just that's the way our business was developed from the outset, was on the international, but we do some domestic intermodal, specifically, kind of that inner triangle, your Chicago, Kansas City, Memphis.
Okay. Yeah. So back to I apologize, Brian, I never go on script. Kevin knows this.
No, that's great.
So back to when you were talking about the visibility and the technology. So I think that's very important, because we've done a lot of work, especially during the COVID time, which everybody did, but for our customers on assisting them on transloading. We don't have our own assets. We used partners such as yourself. I'll have to reach out to you. But we that is one thing that I don't think very many people still have, is that full visibility on the container side of it, right? And I remember, and I know even to this day, now there's probably some advances even from when our team was fully in the depth of it, but you would have to go to 20 different sites to try and track the ocean containers. And the information was critical on, when it was going to arrive. There's a certain number of days you have to understand. Like, there's a lot of information I'm not sure everybody truly understands of what you have to know and the visibility you need. And there really isn't that, as you mentioned, that one bullet. So it's interesting to me that it sounds like you guys have been able to find technology that kind of brings that all into one resource versus 20 different websites that you're having to look at all the time for these ocean lines.
Yeah, when we started, we were going to all of those websites. We would go to the steamship line website. You'd go to the port website. This says that there's a customs hold, but this one says it's cleared. So, we try to help our customers with that proactive communication. Now we've got the technology to tie it together. But, we came up with something at the port cities during the pandemic, a no demurrage guarantee, because demurrage and detention was such an issue. So if you've got a hold and you can't make an appointment and you don't take care of that immediately, like, that becomes a really big deal. So we try to be really proactive and make sure The holds would get removed. If there was a fee, a terminal handling fee that needed to be paid, if it was under $1,000, we did it at no charge. And we did that because sometimes the accounting department at our customer, whether that's a freight forwarder or a BCO, it would take them 24 hours and then be on hold for another 24 hours. We're like, let us just take care of this, make it seamless, and we'll keep you updated every step of the way. That made us more efficient. It made us more valuable to our customers. And it's something that not a lot of people are willing to do because they're afraid they're going to get stuck with the bill. And we've been very fortunate to build great partnerships with the customers. And especially during that time period, people really valued the service.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think the other thing that people don't realize is even once you've gotten it, the box and you're transloading it, there's still visibility and information that you have to find when you got to get the box back or you got more charges. And so,
I mean, especially West Coast, but New Jersey was an issue for a while. Like you have to be able to work with eModal. There's some other products out there that you can go to, but you have to get a empty appointment, or maybe it has to be a dual transaction, or there's all these nuances that broker ABC out of Tennessee might not understand and might not know, and then you get a demurrage bill for 20 days at $150 a day because you couldn't return it. Where we're checking all the sites, we're screenshotting that, we're putting it in the document section. So whether it was us at the time, rules have since changed and changed again, but you could dispute the bill or say, hey, terminal or steamship line or a combination of, please extend last free day or please give us an appointment, and try to mitigate those soft costs.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. And again, I'm diverting a little bit, but I was very intrigued with that. So with their port presence, sorry, I stumbled a bit. No. with your port presence, one of the things that we did want to talk about is the drayage situation. So what are you seeing in regards, let's just take the largest port, right, in LA, Long Beach, in that area. What are you seeing in as far as capacity goes with the drayage versus what it was in years past? It seems like, peak, everybody talks about peak and everybody knows peak. This year, it seems like peak's just a little bit different, that it has a lot of influence on the trucking capacity, not just equipment capacity is kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's a little bit market to market, but LA, Long Beach, specific, all of, whether it's a port or a rail yard. During the pandemic, there was a lot of money to be made. Everybody and their brother bought a truck or 5 trucks. And, there's a lot of things that have changed in the last 2 years. Your insurance cost continues to rise. Compliance continues to be an issue. Running and operating the business has become much more expensive, and the rates have not matched up. So you're now starting to see fairly sizable companies that are going out of business. People that had 50 or 80 trucks and have been in business for 50 years, and they're like, this just isn't worth it anymore. So you're starting to see some of the capacity come out of the marketplace nationwide, and that includes LA, Long Beach. And the biggest thing that we're seeing, we talked about this at the JOC Inland, the not so fast moment, is there too much capacity? One, capacity is leaving the market. And secondly, the non-domiciled CDL drivers and theft has been a huge issue. So, vetting, experience, using tools like Highway, like Carrier 411, using all of those tools. And many of the shippers are like, they're being more stringent on what drivers they're allowing. So in many instances, if it's not our own truck, we're capturing pictures of driver's licenses. We're making sure that it's not a B1 visa, or in California, it was notorious for having no name given on a driver's license. Like, that's just setting yourself up for the potential of theft. So now that they're cracking down on the credentials of these drivers, not only do you have people pushed out of the market because of rates, you're getting drivers pushed out of the market on the drayage side because of compliance. The other thing is drayage in Southern California, it's not just about the drayage drivers. The over-the-road drivers also had some of the same issues with non-domiciled CDLs. So you've got a pool of drivers that might go to an over-the-road company, they might go back to a drayage company, but that pool of drivers is now shrinking. So how does that play out in 2026? It's going to depend upon enforcement. But I think the enforcement is stronger than people would have predicted beforehand, because notoriously, California didn't uphold any of the rules. But some of that is dictated by the shippers as well. The shippers don't want their cargo in an accident. The shippers don't want their cargo stolen. So in combination with the government and shippers being a little more cognizant of safety and security and not just rates, those two forces are coming together. And then we have to see where capacity falls out in 26.
Well, even with whatever level of enforcement there is, has there been? Did it seem like there was a little bit of a preemptive culling of some folks deciding like maybe there's going to be more enforcement than we'd like, and we don't want to.
Well, and some people that if they were not necessarily following the rules, they're like, well, this just isn't worth it. I'm not doing this anymore, right? So, I mean, there was that preemptive, but I really think the cargo theft issue, I would say in 2023 and 2024, most of the shippers, the BCOs, the receivers, they're like, just get my stuff here as cheap as possible. And they did not care. But theft and accidents and news, now they care. And I get emails from customers asking me, well, what about this? And how are you vetting the drivers? And what are the security protocols? Where over the past 2 years, nobody cared.
Right.
That's interesting to tie this all into the cargo theft angle, because on the surface you just think about the individual drivers dealing with the English requirement that's been up there in the news lately as a key piece of enforcement, the immigration checks and all of that kind of thing, but you don't really see that tied into the issue of cargo theft, which has been just rising and rising and rising over the last few years. So you talked about it a little bit with maybe a little bit less of an ability to track things. Is that kind of the big piece of the credential tying into the cargo theft on the other end?
Well, I think it's especially on the brokerage side, it's vetting your carrier, knowing their safety rating, knowing their credentials, vetting it in multiple areas, vetting the driver. How long have you had your CDL? Like, no name given is not acceptable,
right?
Because what if you run off with the cargo? The other thing is, more and more technology comes into play. All of our over-the-road shipments, the driver has got to be on the driver app before he's given a pickup number. So you can't even pick up from the warehouse without the pickup number, and you don't get a pickup number until you're on the app. If you've got other high-value cargo or electronics or even things like tools, for example, could become, a high theft target cargo. Sometimes we're embedding the technology, the embedded chips, trackers, and tracers that you can put inside the trailer or inside a box at one of the end pallets to know, okay, the last pallet is in the same place as the driver. Like, that's really important to know that the driver and the cargo have not been separated. So, having a driver app is great, But if there's really critical or high value shipments, using multiple technologies together just gives you another added layer of security.
So, with all being said, in terms of the need for more sturdy credentials, what are you seeing in terms of actual shortages, and is there a way to stem that? I guess if all of a sudden everyone's leaving the market, or there are just less drivers in a particular place like Long Beach, LA, which is a pretty busy spot. If things start really ramping up in terms of volume, what could we be seeing there?
At this point, I wouldn't say there's a shortage. If it, I mean, this would be great for us, but it would be kind of good for the industry. But if this lags in through March of 26 and through the first quarter, and more people, whether that's drivers, owner operators, or companies, exit the market, the rates are going to recover to a sustainable spot where people that are doing it the right way, that are, like in California, there's, AB5. There's still owner operators out there. We're paying our drivers hourly. We're trying to do it the right way. We've got the right cargo insurance in place. So it's kind of good to have a little bit of purge of the market. So it's going to be making sure that everybody is, up to snuff with their credentials. We need to purge the market a little bit. And, many companies are simply just not making money right now. And I think you guys have probably seen that across the industry. So if you get that purge in the first quarter, I think you're going to see more drivers and companies exit. And then in the second half of 26, you could really see a capacity shortage. And, there's key indicators that I watch. It's not just about the driver market. Housing is a huge driver of large goods being moved, whether that's drywall, lumber, shingles. And as interest rates likely fall, how much does that economy, the housing economy, pick up in the back half of 26? And if things really start ripping and there's a recovery, a freight recovery, and the drivers have left the market, you could see a shortage, and people will be scrambling once again for capacity, which we haven't seen in the last 3 years.
Which is,
do you guys see the same thing?
What was the question, Brian?
You guys see the same thing?
We absolutely do. Yeah. We do. And again, at where Kevin was going with it, it sounds not good, but it kind of is good. In our industry, we kind of need that reset, right? We need something big, something challenging to happen to put everything back in place and level it out a little bit better than what we've seen, as you mentioned, in the last 3 years. So, question that I have for you, because you have a very good take on so many parts of our industry, and one of the things that I think is very interesting is, as you look at all the numbers and everybody puts all these stats and KPIs out there, it looks like imports are down, and that there's not a ton of, but California still seems to be hopping. So what's your take on, if imports are down and you operate transload facilities, that's where you'd see a lot of import activity. What kind of verticals, or why is California still pretty tight?
Well, I think you've seen some consolidation on the steamship line front, right? So, with that consolidation, they're making less port calls, or they would like to make less port calls. Long Beach, LA being the largest one, it's easier to say, hey, we're only going to call Long Beach. We're not going to Oakland. So they're set up in a very good spot. And I think some of that consolidation on the ocean, they're consolidating 15,000 TEU ships over in Asia or India, and then coming over. It's easier to get those big ships. Like, the steamship lines still have to make money too. And when they went from 20,000 a box to 1,500 a box, they can't afford to be making all these port calls. They have to use bigger ships. They have to get more economies of scale. And that all benefits Southern California because they have the biggest port operations. They can handle the biggest ships. And, that's not, I haven't done any real economic analysis on that. That's just my take on why ports like that are busier, where you could see Seattle's like sometimes empty.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, the East Coast, specifically the Southeast, I think has taken a little bit of a hit. Savannah was one of the fastest growing ports. And, there's other issues there too. I mean, the Suez Canal, like that whole thing, people are like, we're not even going to bother. Let's just send the stuff to LA. We'll figure it out when it gets there. The ocean rates are cheap. The IPI service, Inland Point Intermodal is relatively inexpensive, and there's not a lot of congestion. So let's just pick the path of least resistance.
Speaking of, so you mentioned the Suez Canal. We've had Panama Canal issues for a little bit, and then of course the elephant that we haven't brought up is the trade policy over the course of this past year. So, how did you see that affecting? I mean, you mentioned obviously you have business in Canada to the U.S. and also heavy on the import business from places like China. How have you seen all of the trade policy affecting your business and the marketplace in general over the past several months?
Yeah, I think it had a relatively significant impact. People weren't going to, you've seen inventory levels across the country have come down, and you're not going to buy things that you don't need. So if you're unsure and you think that you might get some tariff relief, you're going to wait before you ship. And I think we've seen, a lot of that, whether that's on the retail side here for peak season, or on the, industrial and production side. One of the things I would note that seems odd for us, at least within our business, we still see a ton of automotive imports as far as parts, like things that are coming in for assembly throughout the United States, whether that's, automotive plants throughout the Southeast, Midwest, Michigan. But I think why we're seeing it is they're ordering less. It's more time, even though the automotive industry is not doing well, they still need to hit their production levels. So instead of maybe a slug of 100 containers, they only ordered 20. But when those 20 get to LA Long Beach, they become super time critical because you've got less cargo within that supply chain. So we that's been the one bright spot that we've seen recently, is that drayage, transloading, and trucking into the automotive facilities. And I think that's due to them in general ordering less, and just having to get it there quicker, or if there's hiccups or issues, they need to expedite that cargo.
So how about the in bond piece, all of that, where there were those windows that people saw. So tariff X was implemented starting on April 15th, or there's a pause for 30 days on tariff Y or whatever. Were you seeing a lot of that pull forward happening where?
Well, it was a rush, right? We have some bonded facilities, but everybody wanted to become bonded earlier this year. And, it's not a quick and easy process. So, people are like, oh, can you get me 100,000 square feet of bonded space in XYZ market? It's like, well, you can't build it or get it bonded that quickly. So it was in super, super high demand. I do think that there's a little more clarity with the tariffs and people aren't freaking out like they were earlier in the year. So, I still think it's important and people are going to be looking for bonded facilities and options, but that craze has calmed down a little bit.
So before leaving the whole topic, looping back around. So getting back to service levels versus capacity shortages. For instance, in LA, let's say things pick up in the second part of next year, and there's less capacity. So then obviously the rates go up. How do you see the service keeping up? Because we obviously one part of the lesson learned from that period right after the pandemic got going was service suffered a little bit because there was just a scramble, and people have had time to sort of get things situated a little bit better since then. But how do you see the marketplace kind of keeping up, the industry keeping up with a potentially heavy service, a heavy volume stretch coming back up when maybe we've lost a lot of capacity?
Well, I think it's important for the beneficial cargo owners and the freight forwarders to make drayage and transloading part of their supply chain strategy. And I continue to pound the table on that. Many people in the industry, it's drayage was just an afterthought and a black hole. So hopefully people learn their lesson because of the pandemic. However, memories are very, very short. And we've seen in the last 2 years, how low can you go? It was rate. And I think, you allowing me to have this conversation with you to share with the shipping community just reminds them that don't get caught flat-footed. I mean, rate is, important. Everybody needs to protect their bottom line, but you better have a plan. You better have a strategic partner. You better have some flexibility in your supply chain. Like I can use IPI, go into Racine, Wisconsin out of Long Beach, but I also have the ability to divert out of Racine, Wisconsin. I've got the ability to divert out of Canada if the steamship lines do another call. So just having options within your supply chain and really being cognizant of your partners. I think the security thing has certainly helped people be a little bit more cognizant. But it's customer by customer. Some are still, we're shipping bricks. So it's how low can you go? And other people are, hey, if my line goes down, it costs me $1 million an hour. So people have to make those decisions on what is right for them and their supply chain and what they're shipping. But at least making drayage and transloading part of your supply chain strategy and not just waiting until, I'm in trouble and then we have to try to figure it out.
So you talked about the second part of next year as maybe a hopeful period where volumes start to pick up a little bit. Last year at this time, I think a lot of people were expecting the year of 2025 to be a better one for freight than it turned out to be overall. So how would you say it kind of went over this past year compared to what you were thinking at this time in 2024? And then do you see everything kind of coming together really more for some recovery at that tail end, the second half, maybe fourth quarter of next year?
It was really lumpy. 25 was a lumpy year. You had the pull forward before the tariffs. There was the pause on the tariffs. So it was, kind of a roller coaster. There still was too much capacity in the marketplace. I think that'll get smoothed out in 26. Who knows how the economy is going to recover when those volumes do recover. But I think we'll have a much smoother year in 26. And then anything can happen, right? Nobody saw COVID coming. There could be a tsunami somewhere. I mean, there could be an earthquake in LA and the port could be unavailable. You don't know. Like there's so many things. And it's usually the thing that you don't look for is the thing that ends up happening. And that's why people scramble. And that's why having options is always great rather than, I always tell people, well, why don't you use 2 or 3 ports of entry, not just one? Well, they're like, well, that's just what we do. Okay, well, it's good until it's not good, right? So
Lumpy. I'm going to use
yeah,
lumpy.
I had not heard lumpy
I like
to describe
lumpy.
this year.
Yes,
I like that.
I like that one. Yes, we're gonna quote you on that one. It's so true, so very true.
Well, you talked about Savannah kind of getting a little lighter. We obviously had the threat of the strike coming into the beginning of 25 here. Have people still kind of stuck to that West Coast adjustment because of, as you said, Suez and some worries about the strike? And was that something that was preventing people from going to the 2 or 3?
I mean, Savannah is still going to be one of the highest performing ports. I do think the Suez, I do think larger ships consolidating going into the West Coast, less demand. I think all that is there, but I still see, there's so many new things being built in the Southeast in the automotive production. I mean, that's the Southeast and the Texas. That's where growth is going to come. So I can't imagine that those ports don't have a bigger recovery and are more important in 2026. But a lot of it depends on the steamship lines, and I'm not an ocean guy, so I don't know. Maybe all they want to do is load 20,000 TEU ships, and that means more stuff goes to LA.
You touched on the home building piece. You've worked in the industry a little bit on that side as well. One of the things that we were talking about coming into this year was the thought that maybe home building would pick up a bit more than it did, and it didn't really. Is that something that does feel like now that we're seeing the interest rates coming down, we're going to get to that point where that really picks up again?
I think so. I mean, the way I look at the housing market is I do have some experience in being a partner in a construction business as well. The way I kind of see it, it's been the tale of the haves and the have-nots, and those people that have had a lot of money in the stock market. The high-end home in building industry has been great, but it's the middle market. It's when you do need a mortgage. It's the subdivision production homes that have really kind of come to a standstill. And there's a couple things. I mean, one, I still think they're after 2009, 10, 11, even through 12. I still think there's a housing shortage. So at some point that's got to pick back up. And, we were listening to one of the economists at the JOC Inland, and his predictor is that 4% on the 10-year note, which is what dictates what your interest rate is on a mortgage. Once that gets below 4, you're going to see things start to roll. Mm-hmm. So it's been stubborn. I was watching it yesterday. The Fed cuts interest rates. The 10-year doesn't move.
Yeah.
So, that 10-year at 4.1, 4.2 has been really sticky. And I think if you get that into the 3.7 to 3.9 range, you're really going to start to see the housing market rebound. And, I listen to a lot of people like you, a lot of economists. I mean, our economy, so to speak, you look at the stock market, it's all based on technology, data centers, and the Mag 7. Your consumer stuff and your home building has been pretty stodgy. And I have to think, again, I'm not in the government. I'm not an economist. I don't know what they're going to do. But at some point, they're going to see the cracks and the weakness, whether it's in housing and consumer, and they're going to make those cuts and things are going to recover. Is it in March? Is it in June? We don't know when it's going to happen. But I just think that at some point we will see that recovery.
So jumping back on the dray transload truck, I mean, I think I'm kind of still trying to figure, because we're a huge proponent of that service, and I don't understand. It's more like, why wouldn't you than why do you, in my opinion. And I think that there's a lot of keys. And I just had this conversation with somebody the other day that they were just shocked as to why would you transload? It's in a container. Why are you breaking that container and transloading it? And so just just a little pitch, just a little marketing, something. But tell me if am pretty on some of the benefits of this, right? So one benefit is it, obvious. You can consolidate depending on the product and the density of the product, but you can consolidate 2 to 3 40s into one 53-foot, or whether it be a 53-foot container or a 53-foot truck, right? That's one, right? So you're paying for one movement inland versus 3 or 2 or 3. I think that one's somewhat obvious, and I don't know why people don't do it more. But you mentioned something before. Another thing that is somewhat obvious is like everybody's promoting this IPI. Hey, why wouldn't you just move that one container on the rail? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a speed of transit, just like you're talking about in the automotive. If you do IPI, it literally could take much longer for it to get to inland than it could be if you pull it off the port and transload it. The other thing that I picked up on that you mentioned, which makes a whole lot of sense, is people are shipping smaller quantities versus larger quantities. So if people are shipping smaller quantities that are going to different places, then you're not going to be able to move that one full container to a certain destination location. You need to break it, deconsolidate it, and then send it out on other avenues. Am I getting a few of the high points of why this is a good service?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's speed and reliability, and it's time definite. You know what you're getting. LA Long Beach, great example. We've been talking about it a lot. Your dwell time from ship to rail, depending on volumes, depending on rail schedules, depending on what the UP and the BN are bringing in, you could have a 10-day dwell time between ship and train. Well, if you're doing drayage, transloading, and trucking, we pick it up upon first available appointment. So that cuts off 9 days on your transit. And if the truck is 3 days and the rail is 5 days, there's 2 more. So we saved 11 days, and it's time definite. I think the one thing, people like certainty, and once you capture the cargo, you have certainty.
Right.
If you haven't captured the cargo, you have no certainty. So, another thing would be, we mentioned automotive in Michigan, right? Well, if you've got to do a switchover in Chicago, so it has to come off of one train to go onto another train. Well, what if there's a storm? What if? Again, you don't have that certainty. So, I think the potential combination of railroads might help out some of that, but still, if that cargo is important to your supply chain or your customers, or you've got a contract with Walmart, and if you miss your RDD date, you get fined. Like, capturing the cargo at the soonest possible point is really, really important.
And depending on what's happening in the world, it's cost a benefit, right? Because if from my understanding, and I don't think I'm way off the mark here, is the steamship lines really don't like their box going inland anyway. So depending on what's going on in the markets, they price accordingly, whether they want you to use IPI or not.
Yeah. Right now, there's a lot of volume there's capacity, there's containers available. So it's not like it was during the pandemic. Right. But wait until they start getting $5,000-$8,000 instead of $1,500 for a box. They're going to be like, I want my container back. I'm not allowing IPI service.
Right.
You have to terminate it at the port. So, we're going to see right now it's free flowing. It's easy. There's no real volume issue, capacity issues on the rail. But as soon as those rates start coming back, they're going to be like, I want my container back now.
So tell people more about how they can get involved with PortX, find more about you. I know you get some stuff out there from time to time. You mentioned you were at Inland. You're doing some conferences here and there and getting out there. So tell people how they can work with you.
Sure. I'll be at Manifest coming up in February. I'll be at TPM coming up in March. Our website, portxlogistics.com, is great. We've got a great LinkedIn following too. I'd follow PortX Logistics. And one of the things I think is one of the greatest tools for our customers around the globe, not even in the US, we do a weekly market update. And the weekly market update, which you can find on our blog, you can find on LinkedIn, you can subscribe to it via email. But the greatest thing to me is we're putting that information out there for the customers and for the industry. And it's not necessarily a sales pitch for PortX. What is happening at the rail ramp in Denver? How is the Hudson ramp different from the Denver ramp? Hey, there's a hurricane that was in Houston. How is Houston impacted? What are your dwell times from ship to rail in certain ports? And then, we're talking about volumes and all those things, which really help. If you're sitting at a desk in Long Island, it's hard for you to gather all that information. And us being a national and even, US and Canadian company, we're gathering all that data, putting it together in one, 5-minute read, and everybody can see in that weekly market update. And Joe Rice, one of the founding members of PortX, does a really great job putting that together. So we highly recommend checking that out.
Great, Brian. We appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you, Brian.
Yes, thank you so much.
So kind of started that one with one focus. I think we diverted from the main focus.
We diverted a lot.
Yeah. My intro doesn't really make as much sense based on where we went, but a really good conversation.
Oh, I thought it was great.
Covering a lot of bases.
Yeah. And covering a lot of things that we're touching on in our market today. So I think that's why it was so good to kind of divert a bit, was to be able to get they all tie together in one way.
Yeah. Everything ties together.
So I think it was very helpful to get Brian's perspective on a lot of different things and to keep it on one single focus.
Yeah, we were talking on the sort of the overall picture more than one particular issue, and there are a lot of pieces to that overall picture.
There are.
And it'll be interesting to see how things play out as that overall picture comes into hopefully a little bit more focus as next year comes in.
Yeah, and I mean we're seeing a longer peak constrained capacity this year, but based on the comments that we talked to Brian, is we may see another one at the end of next year, but it will be a different component of what's caught, or maybe not a different component, but some more things, outerlying things that are creating that, where still today we feel like we have plenty of capacity, but it sounds like it's on its way to trim down and exit. So.
Yeah, you do hear the capacity continuing to leave the market. So then the other piece is, will the volume really pick up? And
right.
That's the question that nobody really knows the answer to just yet. And I think
we certainly hope so.
We've thought that before, though. So.
We have.
It'll have to happen eventually.
At some point, I would hope.
Yes. So again, thanks to Brian for joining us on this edition of the Intermodal Logistics Podcast. And thank you for joining us as well. Please do rate and review us wherever you get the podcast. Drop us a like, drop us a comment. We are happy to follow up with you. If you'd like to email us, we can be reached at podcast@intechlogistics.com. Our website is www.intechlogistics.com as well. For Shelley Austin, I'm Kevin Baxter. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you next time.